Hey, hi, howdy, hello. I am looking for some lore. Um,
Welcome, gentle listener. I am Voldemort, your faithful servant. Here is a compilation of one of the ongoing plot lines of my fan fictions that are used to explore and
I
demonstrate the
finished the
setting of
Empress,
Warhammer
by the way.
40k, the grim darkness of the far future, where there is no time for peace, there is only time for war. Many an entry is the result of a vote, as I will leave them
Now
on
I
a
think I'm gonna do
cliffhanger,
the
and then
cap.
get the gentle listeners to forge the by voting in the comments, so they can control the direction and events of the story.
Okay, so now, I've decided to do sanguinious lore and blood angels. Because I haven't done sanguinious yet. I've done bits and pieces that mention sanguinious, but I haven't done his actual lore. So, I figured we would go there. Hope you enjoy.
If you enjoy any of these stories, then do watch the weekly entries on the guides and prepare to exert your own influence and vote on the storylines. Now, I very much hope you enjoy the following compilation, a lead up to my campaign, Met Abundance Tertius. We are beings of anger. We were designed this way, forged this way,
Nothing
by
is
history
cooperating
or
with me
lineage,
today.
by the choice of others, by the will of the Emperor, with the agreement of his son, the angel, our Father. For anger is
We're gonna try
necessary,
anyway, though.
and we have so many layers, built one upon the other, stacked bricks, a mighty tower of our rage, our fury. It starts our birth and continues to grow more calcified with each year, each stage. It is our armor, and it is our spur. It is our and it is our curse. Sometimes I remember my life intertwined in ways that did not happen, could not happen. My dreams are a struggle sometimes. At others they are a clear pathway, a straight road, but always vivid and potent. I find it difficult to sleep outside my sarcophagus. I find it impossible not to dream when within it. I am not strange amongst my kind in this regard. This harkens back to the first time, of course. For us, it all begins in the sarcophagus. Our new bodies, our new lives, our new dreams, our new duty. For I am a son of Sanguinius, and his blood flows through my veins. I am an Astartes of the Blood Angels. My dreams often take me back to that moment, the moment I knew I would be a Blood Angel, or that I would die trying to become one. The moment my brother died. It all happened so quickly. We were stood atop one of the many crags of our red world, up high to see our prey. Alas, as I leaned forward, I slipped. I should have plunged to my death down into the red sands hundreds of meters below. Instead, Lucas' face passed mine as he leapt and grabbed at me and hauled me back to safety. But in this he overbalanced, teetering at the edge on his tiptoes before failing his battle with gravity. and plunging over the edge himself. I scrabbled forward only to watch his face get smaller as his arms fumbled in the air. But he did not thrash. His face was almost calm, placid. He made a choice, but he was at peace with his decision. It was Luca's wish, always his greatest dream, to be one of the Sky Warriors. He would not go a day without proclaiming it. So bold was he that soon none doubted it. The day of his sacrifice was the day the sky chariots proclaimed the time of challenge had come, and the pilgrimages to Angel's Fall would begin. The irony. I told my father of the events of the day, and packed only that which I would need to travel the Rad Deserts to Angel's Fall. My mother was silent. My father merely nodded his agreement. The dream had to be made real if Luca's memory was to be upheld. He understood. Despite me only being a boy, he understood. Those days were hard. I was scrawny, yet strong, but burned and blackened by the sun and the sand. I was only barely recognizable as human then. The trials were unlike anything I had ever experienced. So bloody, so brutal, so uncompromising. A mere 50 of us were chosen, out of all of the hundreds who came, of those who survived those bloody days. But the fire of Luca was with me. I had somehow caught it when he grabbed me, when he saved me. His fire passed to me. His anger joined my own, and it burned all at which we threw it. It is how we pass the trials against those larger or faster, those older or stronger. We beat them down with our joined rage. More and more trials and tests continued within the fortress of the Blood Angels. We were all agog at the magic of the chapter then, being little more than feral nomadic plains people. But we were not given time to ponder. The training was intense and often deadly. All the while we, the denizens of Baal, were small and often misshapen, pocked or affected by the horrors of existence on Baal. Yet the trainers were all statuesque, chiseled demigods, who seemed like animated marble masterpieces. They were so noble of bearing, so handsome, so perfect. None of us aspirants could understand how we would turn into things such as they. But eventually we learned. The final stage that triggered our gene seed would be the last and most daunting trial. For we would all be injected with the blood of the primearch sanguinious, and then placed in life-supporting sarcophagi for a full year to permit the change to take effect. As stated, I was scrawny and misshapen, as were we all, so you can imagine the changes were drastic, took time, and were excruciating. Our bodies were changed slowly over that year. Our bones lengthened. Our muscle mass exploded. Our skins became calm and clear, and our very facial structures altered. Endless months of slow agony and endless screaming. The kind of screaming that makes your throat and even lungs burn, and your head feels it is about to burst through the lava-hot sensation being channeled to it by the nerves. Such pain, without escape. But the pain was not the only bedfellow locked into our sarcophagi with us. There were the dreams. Dreams of beauty, worlds so various and splendid that it strikes one dumb. Visions of the crusade, and the angel himself, our father, sanguinious. Nightmares of betrayal and siege and final failure, of battle and of death. For with the blood and its changing ways also come the memories of our primearch sanguinious, his struggles, his joys, his victories, and his final death at the hands of the arch-traitor Horus Lupercal. The images, the dreams, the memories, the pain, the change, the year locked away. You go through the midst of madness, its deepest, darkest well, only then to rise and go through to the other side. All the while the angel is there. From the second the blood is transmitted, he is there. For it is the angel, his memory, his spirit, that meets us at the end of this journey, welcomes us back to the light of sanity, oft just before the sarcophagus is opened. Not all survive the ordeal. Many an aspirant has passed their last seconds enclosed in a sarcophagus. None have ever gone through the experience easily, or have, at least once in all of that time, wished for it to be over, irrespective of how. When that lid is finally lifted, slid off by a coterie of sanguinary priests, what comes out does not even mildly resemble that which went in, either physically, mentally, emotionally, or spiritually. When I awoke, I was calm, and greeted those who exhumed me as brothers. I soon looked upon my new visage, the perfect form, the incredible height and power, the clear skin, the golden hair. Yet my mind had changed as much as my body. My interior now matched my exterior. In every single way, I had been born anew. Few talk of it, few acknowledge it. The rage inside that box, not just due to the inherited feelings of our gene father, not only due to the curse of our seed and the subsequent curse from the forces of the enemy. No. Also simply by being locked in a box and left in agony for a year. Being shut away in the dark with nothing but pain and majesty. Like a thousand-folded blade, these layers of anger were not only added, but hardened, forged into our very souls. Our life had been pain. Our emperor had been betrayed, and our father slain. The bright dream of a utopia stolen. The knowledge that the people of Baal were left in our misery, just to provide better candidates. The knowledge that we would know no other joy than to fight and then die for the emperor, our people, and our chapter. We sacrifice our humanity, our place amongst our people, for one reason alone: to defend them. Rage. We are the directed rage of the father betrayed, the angel slain, a dream destroyed, a people in danger. I, Rubio Misaro, captain of the Blood Angels, a true son of Sanguinious, will never cease in my vigil, nor would any of my brethren Astartes of the Blood Angels. For without us, without the Blood Angels, without our constant vigil, without our constant war, without our constant rage, surely Imperium Nihilus, nearly a full half of the Imperium of Man, would fall. The captain passed his blood-red helm to his subordinate and began to slowly trudge down the hill alone. His footfalls were heavy and his shoulders down. He looked at points as if he would fall to one side or the other. So ungainly was his stagger down that hill, toward the place he never thought he would stand, to the place he never wanted to be, to her dead body. As he approached, he felt all of the weight of the years on his shoulders. Every last decade, every last second of his long, long life felt like a mountain on his back this day. He looked at anything but her. His pauldrons with the blood-red tear on them, his mighty gloves, one being a power fist, to the sky above, covered in pillars of smoke from lingering fires as it was, but calm and tranquil. It only made things worse. He had not been able to do it, even after Baal. The disconnect to reality was too stark, the skies filling with xenos of a blinding array. Not when they hit and so many of his brothers died. Not then. Why now? He did not know. and he did not want to know. The grinding emptiness of chairs around tables, names ceremoniously erased from lockers, the list of his brethren who would never raise bolter or chainsword in the name of the angel and the Imperium again. He had witnessed it all, understood it all, accepted it all. But this was the final straw. The day he never thought he would see. The day he never imagined would come. And the floodgates opened. Centuries of conflict and madness and battle and loss now overwhelmed him. The lone armored man approached his destination, and like a martinet with its strings cut, he toppled forward onto his knees, like all vitality had been removed from him, washed away by the outpouring of grief. He could walk no further now that he could see her, now that he could not avoid seeing her, as he rested his head against her cold form, now that he could not avoid seeing what they had done to her. And it began, quietly at first, tears began to leak, then more and more like a river. His breathing escaped his control and came in shudders as he opened his arms to place his open palms on her, as he tried to hug her with all of his remaining might. She was gone. He began to whisper, knowing she would never answer him, never show sign of life again. Do you remember how we met? That day on the flight deck, preparing for the drop, and you would not let me aboard. Not until I had proven myself to you. The others laughed so hard at me. I admit, I started embarrassed and then turned angry, but you always knew how to make me laugh in the end. How long we played together until the final klaxon went off. Our first campaign. Barely knew my bolter from my braces then. How many times did you save me just in that one campaign? And every campaign since. It's why I refused promotion or transfer time and again, old girl. So I could be with you. But Baal changed everything. You have to know that. There were simply so few of us left that I had no choice. If the decision led to this, then I swear I will hate every day I have to wear the mantle of captain. I wish you could hear me and tell me it isn't so. Some sign. Anything. You turned the tide again, old girl. Like so many times before. You turned the tide. We're on our knees. But you came, unbidden, but you came, as always. We were pinned down and our attack had faltered. Decapitating strike turned into a pitched battle. I underestimated their will. We were low on ammunition, and you came. I know it was you who led the rest, despite being left behind. We thought we were protecting you, but should have known you'd not be left out. Not while we were dying. If you had not hit that flank, girl, we could have been wiped out. So many of my brothers lived today because of you, girl. But why did you then do it? Why take on the night? Why take on the night? Why? We were saved, and you could have taken us out of there. I know you could have seen things better than us, knew what was happening better than us, with your eyes. But why? A glorious kill, old girl. But the cost was too high. Too high. Look what I have done to you. The warrior pushed his head up against the metal sides of what remained of a thing that had fought with his chapter from before the angel himself was found during the Great Crusade. The mangled and melted wreckage of the mutilated Land Raider still smoked, but no spark, no light, no single sign of activity, of life, came from what remained. And he wept, like he had not been allowed, permitted, or felt possible to weep for centuries. She was gone. I will miss you, girl, so much. Captain Rubio Massaro stood from his place next to an ancient and now wrecked Land Raider, his countenance somber, his bearing legal, as he proceeded to rejoin his men waiting quietly at the edge of the bowl. He looked each man in the eye as he spoke. Now we finish this. We take our wrath to the very heart of this incursion, this invasion. We strike at the dragon in his lair. There was no cheer from his gathered marines. There were but stoic nods of assent. Hours passed, and the battle had been intense, the marines pushing further and further into a last conurbation that had not been purified and pacified. Heading towards the center of the disruption, the thing that had caused so many forces of the Dark Powers to its cancerous corruption. Yet the enemy would not go down so easy. Demons streamed towards the Blood Angels' ranks, despite all the pinpoint accuracy of their bolt shots culling the throng. Yet still they would hit. Unlike many other chapters of the legions, who would perhaps fall back in orderly squads or stand their ground and fire until they had no further choice, not the sons of Sanguinious. The Blood Angels countercharged. A tactical squad, no chainsaws or jump packs, they charged nonetheless. Using their bolters as precise bludgeons and all of the strength of their armor and skill, they fought forward. The red demons in front of them met them with all of the force and rage of an ocean. Yet they fell back under the punishment these red-clad marines were dishing out to them. Every sword swing parried, every barb blocked, with counter-strikes that destroyed the beings first time, every time. But they were just the wake, not the prow. At the tip of the V, the top of their spear point, was Captain Rubio. With his power sword crackling blue energy and his Infernus pistol blazing, Captain Rubio Massaro strode forward, never missing a step, never slowing, never relenting. Like a god of war, he felt all before him. In the center of it all, his rhythm set his mind a blank. The captain heard what at first seemed like the beginnings of an auditory hallucination. But then it became clearer. A voice in his mind. One he had never heard before, yet recognized immediately. My curse grows within you all. One day, I will have you all. One day you will be lost within your rage so much that you walk into my realm, from which you will never escape. One day the Blood Angels will fight for the Blood God. One day the Blood Angels will collect skulls for the Skull Throne. Give in. Be the first. But you will not be alone, for every one of your brothers will join you in their trickles and then their droves. My curse grows within you. Be the first, and you will be the mightiest. Can you hear me when I think, while I destroy your minions? As you hear, so are you heard. Then I shall give my response. How dare you? How dare you put out such a fetid fare as if it were a banquet? Before you stands a son of the angel, a son of Sanguinious, and I know thee, Cabanda, proclaimed minion servant lickspittle of corn. Yea, but lickspittle is too high an epithet for thee. You are an echo of an echo. You are nothing. I shall explain it to thee once alone. For there is something you cannot understand, cannot fathom, cannot grasp. Not if I gave you all of the experiences, the lives, the achievements, the senses of every being who ever lived. From the first sea beings who gazed up into the first sun, to the final sentients that will witness the last star burn cold. Not if I gave you 1,000,000 lifetimes to ponder these experiences. Not if I gave you until the end of time could you possibly understand. You think yourself a mighty demon prince, yet I know thee for what thou art. You protest of power and infallibility. But if that were so, why hound my door with your begging bowl for supplication and service? I know you to be an echo of an echo, a dream of a being that calls itself a god. But in reality it is nothing more than a collection of the misery of everyone's bad days. We have something you will never experience, never possess. We are the sons of the angels, aye, the sons of the Emperor's design. Despite having greatness running through our veins, we are but human. And we have something you will never, ever have. A choice. So I say to thee and your master and all of the cohorts of his minions, I say it but once and once alone, for now and for all time. Get ye hence, take thyself from my door, demon. For I choose to be a true son of the angel, and I will never bow to the likes of thee. And come what may, I am at peace with this decision. The storm raven hurtled through the skies towards its target like a lightning bolt, through fields of fire, flak and small arms aimed up at it. Most was evaded by the furious action of the incredibly skilled pilot. He was used to the task, delivering his fallen brothers to the very center of the fray, its very heart. But he always kept the comms from the central section turned off. On his first job, he had kept them on. But the lesson hadn't been learned. Oh, how it had been learned. For he had heard what they said. He heard what was being spat at them by the legendary Lemartes, guardian of the lost. And on that day, he near lost the command of his faculties. He nearly fell into the chasm that was the rage. Now he thought only on his task, had to concentrate on this one moment. For even the memory of those words would threaten his soul again. Inside the main compartment of the specially altered assault vessel, the same thing was happening, as it always did when it was deployed. Lemartes was with his brothers of the Death Company. He was whipping them into a froth of rage that would make even a coordinate berserker take pause. The forces of our enemy, the great betrayer, await us, brothers. We have but moments before we are unleashed. Remember the faces of the foes you slay today. Remember when you strike what they have done. They have betrayed the Emperor. They have betrayed the Crusade. They have betrayed humanity. These lapdogs and lickspittles of Horus and his vile ilk, these traitors, deserve the fullest extent of our wrath. The sons of the angel, the sons of the Emperor. These vile curs are without honor, without courage, without virtue, without glory, without any redeeming feature. For they are the basest of all things. They are vile and deserve our righteous fury. They deserve the cut of our chainswords, the blessing of our bolters. They deserve to be crushed underfoot, and we shall give it to them. For they are the most despicable thing ever to arise from the human race. They are traitors. They betrayed our Lord, the Angel. They betray our Master, the Emperor. They betray our entire race. They cavort there beneath the very walls of the Imperial Palace, looking for a way in, looking to slay and slaughter our brothers who guard that mighty and hallowed wall. They look to lay their rough and unclean hands on the Emperor himself. Shall we allow this? Do we permit these vile scum to bray and bluster at our very walls, Do we allow them the nefarious scheme? Do we allow them to defile the halls of the Emperor? Do we allow them to hack and claw and spit on our very primearch, our father, on Sanguinious himself? Do we allow them to trample his image, to wipe their boots on his wings? Do we allow them to defecate on his body? Do we allow them to then slay our Emperor? Do we? Then buckle your bolters and let rip thy swords and chain thy fury, thy wrath, for this day we will destroy the traitors. The cabin hummed with the whir of chainswords as the light turned green at the hatch and it was swiftly thrown open. Some 50 feet beneath were densely packed a veritable sea of enemies. None wore the power armor of the named traitors, none the emblems of chaos, but to the men who jumped from the storm raven right into their midst, there was nothing but the images of the sons of Horus overlaid onto their true visage. As the Death Company carved a bloody path through their opposition, their arms moving faster than was deemed possible by their foe, wounds that would have killed even Astartes, severed limbs, broken bones, did nothing but fuel their rage. Nothing stopped them as they carved through the madness-induced illusions of what they now saw as the traitor mass, forms that would soon all be dead, as the wrath of the Death Company chewed through their ranks like whirlwinds of unstoppable rage. It had been hard fighting, and it had been long. This site, this mausoleum to martyrdom, was where they had drawn a line in the sand, had decided to make their stand. Where once they capered and rutted, where they performed their debased hedonistic foulness. Now this is where they fought for their God, and they fought for their lives. This is where they beseeched their foul master, and their throats ran hoarse from the screaming of its name. But this was where the angels of midnight had also decided to end the matter. It was going apace, as intended, to schedule. But that was a lie. The patterns of madness that allowed these angels to justify what they were doing. For there could be no other word for it than extermination. From the one perspective, the side of the people of Isokarian Alpha, this was justified slaughter. They had been alone. They had been cut off from the rest of the distant Imperium. They had been beset for months, tortured and hunted and destroyed. Their cities smashed, their entire people on the brink. For when the great tear across reality had opened, the lights went out. And the Xenos aliens had swept in when the Imperium was napping, and they had harvested humans like cattle on this world. They had swept across the world and killed or harvested all, before then mustering just outside of the range of the last remaining human weapons of any note, just outside of their main capital. And to the Xenos it had been more a celebration, a gathering for a festival before their attack. They had been so certain of victory that they celebrated it before the deed was even done. But none who huddled in that last city could see any way that they would fail. They had little in the way of defenses, few tanks or materials of war remaining, and nothing they had done before had availed them any good. The Xenos had been too
Sanguinious
much for
and
them,
the Blood
even when they
Angels.
could field entire regiments of planetary defense forces. But on that last day, when only this, the capital, survived, it was then that the people of Isokarian were saved. In their darkest hour, on the very dawn of what considered most to be their last day, their deliverance had come. For storms had arrived out of nowhere as the enemies gathered around for their last assault.
Well, not
Those
really.
storms
It's
covered all before and around
more
the
Blood
city,
Angel
the
lore
last
than it
human
is
sanctuary
anything.
on all of Isokarian. They raged for 6 days and 6 nights. And when they abated, when their fury was finally blown out, the Xenos were gone. All was scoured from the planet. All. The people of Isakarian were then informed, instructed, instilled with the faith of the being who had saved them. And it was not the Emperor. Some of the new priests stated it was the Prince of Pleasure, Slanesh. He'd been contacted by a single man, one who would later be made king in all but name. This man had prayed for his entire world, his entire people. He had prayed for deliverance, and they had received it. At first, the rites and ways of worshipping their new god seemed a massive festival, a carnival of colors and music and song. For their new lord, their new protector, he was unlike the dour emperor of mankind. He was a lord of life and love and laughter, and he celebrated them all to abundance. Yet as time went on, as it always does, the rites became more involved, less structured, more bacchanal, more extreme. And as the years passed, hedonism and debauchery became the norm. The cavorting couplings went from private affairs to writhing carpets of sweaty grunting, animalistic rutting across every road and alleyway on high days. The gutters running with blood, when the sunset and a red moon leered down on the horrors they performed upon one another in the name of their dark benefactor. And none saw how far they had fallen, how far they had stooped, until they were confronted by the returning extended family of humanity, who were, quite rightly, utterly repulsed. And they saw in one brief look that the people had turned to chaos. From the perspective of the Imperium, the world had been left to its own devices, left to look to its own defenses, because there was simply no way to get to them in time. The warp routes had been cut off, the galaxy darkened for a time, and when the lights went back on, communications were possible again. Then the galaxy was ablaze. Worlds uncounted had been attacked, entire sectors had been ravaged, and in that time it was only those worlds that kept beaming out their distress cores that were placed on priority, as they were the only worlds that the overstretched forces of the Imperium could guarantee still had any populace left to defend. So Isakarian was presumed lost. And when the combined force led by the Angels of Midnight reached the world, they had expected to drop off the contents of a colony ship and move on. But instead, they found that the world had not been washed clean of humanity. Quite the opposite. It had been contaminated by them and their twisted heretical beliefs. The deliberation was less than a heartbeating coming to a decision. And so, the Sicarian Alpha was then beset by an almost identical event, so similar in nearly every way.
Oh no.
The forces of the Imperium hit, and hit hard. They set about scouring all human life from the globe. And it was, again, the capital alone that held out. Or at least, it did. Now it was on the verge of its final destruction. For the commandment of the chapter master of the Angels of Midnight had been as predictable as it was complete. All human life on Isakarian was to be wiped out. Of course, but this place, the seat of power, was to be flattened and the ground salted and glassed. But as with everything the Angels of Midnight did, it would be thorough. They had to make sure that every single last Chaos worshipper was dealt with before they took to orbit again and laid it waste. Every single last one purged in the name of their father, the Angel. Forever was the Angel known to give warning, then, if ignored, to lay utter waste to any who denied the power and righteousness of their cause. And thus did his sons, the Angels of Midnight, set about their bloody task. The poor defenseless people of Iscarian were not to be underestimated, however. Or more to put it, their Dark Lord and Master was not. For as they marched into the place after the guard had shelled it for a week without break, the Chaos Forces had twisted many a normal human cultist into a travesty. Creatures came charging out of every angle, what were once human. Now all were writhing, screaming things of flesh, horrors to be put down. And in these engagements, the bolter had, as always, reigned supreme. Yet it was when they came closer to the center of the place that things got worse. For as a last resort, a desperate gamble, the people there had sacrificed a huge proportion of their remaining number in the most terrible ceremonies any had yet performed. But the angels of midnight were ready. Their deep midnight blue power armor was no longer proof to every attack from the resisting cultists, no. For now death stalked the city in the form of the Neverborn as well. Creatures of the warp permitted to gain entrance to the material world by this dark ritual. The tactical squad had moved forward, thrusting into this last seat of impurity along with the rest of their company. The sergeant finished scanning around him and ducked down behind the wrecked walls again, between the howls of pain and pleasure that echoed around the entire landscape. There had been deeper rumblings. Something big was on its way. But it was not demonic. It was a very old, battered and barely serviceable demon rust tank. Behind it crept entire walls of twisted scum. For its lack of sheen and polish, the battle cannon on its top was no less lethal, no less destructive. Far from its one large gun barked out and removed much of the cover that it was pointed at. The sergeant knew his men could handle the hordes of scum, knew they would finish them all eventually, be it by bolter or by fist if necessary. But here in the silken darkness was where the angels of midnight had learned to be lords, fighting their twisted brothers of the night for centuries uncounted on a world cut off by the murder storm. They had learned all right. Now they were the kind of terror that usually found itself in the clutches of the vile ones, the corrupting powers. But despite this unceasing hell that they had lived in, they had never broken, had never devolved, never become creatures of unreasoning slaughter, or so most believed. Their millennia-long isolation by warp storm, cleared by the tear across the galaxy. But when they were found by the indomitous crusade, they were nearly wiped out themselves, until their true nature was discerned. For they appeared so much like those that they had learned to fight, the masters of the shadows. No Raven Guard were they, certainly, but of all of the sons of Sanguinious, they were those who dwelt in shadows, gained strength from its dark embrace, and they had been absorbed into the crusade, brought back into the Imperium proper, given new primearch marines and equipment enough to return them to a full chapter in materials and ships and all of the resources of war they would require to lead their own splinter crusade force. But now, their rage and passion, the love of lord and race entire, meant that they were the hammer of the Emperor, and they indeed walked where other angels feared to tread. When the tank rumbled to the neck of the road which they moved up, the tactical squad broke and scattered. Like shadows they moved, while one always made distraction and drew the eyes of all. But from one to another would the watcher be drawn, as they took it in turns to scuttle, creep, skulk, and then charge out for a second, always confusing the enemy, until they were closer. All the while, the tactical squad's one heavy weapon was firing down on the tank, missiles hitting more often than not, but then usually seeping into a coloured mist around the tank. Little damage. It was piling up, but it was slow going. A glamour of field erected by the twisted power of its dark master. And it was a distraction as well. After the first missiles were on target and failed to cripple the old fossil, the sergeant knew he would have to get up close and personal with it. Hence the firing of their missile launcher, the bolter rounds, the drawing of attention this way and that. All of it was done by his squad, so the sergeant could get into position. He more than managed this, of course. He was an angel of midnight. And thus it was he found himself 4 stories up, looking down at the rear of the tank as it passed beneath him. He only had one shot at this, It had to be good. The sergeant slowly exhaled, raised his bolter up. But it was not the bark of the Emperor's own wrath, the bolter, that finally rang out. Before the sergeant squeezed the trigger on his weapon, he switched it to its secondary mode. For the gun was rare, and although not as old as many, it had an underslung attachment. A single shot of a powerful melter charge. Just the one. For situations just like this. And when his shot flew out and vaporized the air between him and his target, he knew it would run true. The one melter shot slammed into the back of the tank, exactly where he had wanted it to be, and the effect went into its armor and superheated it until it literally melted. Burning liquid metal dropped into the tank and set off a chain reaction that led to it exploding on the spot. The sergeant stepped back from the window as the tank exploded, then returned again to look down at his handiwork. The vehicle was gone, taking over a score of vile scum with it. But now, said scum were nothing more than a milling and confused mass, and the sergeant drew out his chainsword, hit the one chevron ordering his men to attack, then put his foot on the windowsill and stepped out. He fell down amongst the milling crowd of tainted heretics and cut loose. As he did, his men, all 9 of them, appeared out of corners and shadows and alleyways. None would escape their wrath this day. None. The lieutenant held his rage in check, but only barely. He knew it was wrong. He knew he was incorrect. But his eyes told him a different story. Despite the protestations of his mind, his heart rebelled. They were being left to die. He had seen the bloody mess that was his captain, who had returned from his first meeting with the chapter master, the legendary Gabriel Seth. What a possessed madman to beat his new line officer to within an inch of his life. What kind of general would he be to these men? The primearch that just so happened to have the blood of the angel, his very seed in them. For most, reunification with their designated chapter had been a moment of celebration, of camaraderie, of homecoming. But not so for those primearchs who had been sent to wear the colours of the flesh tearers. They had been viewed with suspicion, sneered at openly, or even ignored when they first arrived. Then their captain had been dragged out of his first meeting with the chapter master in a bloody mess. There was real concern amongst the primearchs, and the lieutenant was now seeing all of their fears come true. His captain had been leading from the front and was heavily engaged, so he left his number 2 in charge of the field oversight, the tactical overview. So it was the lieutenant could see the battle progress, could see its ebb and flow, and the Xenos tyrannid filth appeared in numbers far greater than had been projected. Far greater. He had informed his captain, but was met with a snapped answer to inform Central Command, nothing more. And thus the lieutenant had done so, but received no response. Nothing. It had been minutes, and in a battlesphere as complex as this one was turning out to be, even seconds could make all of the difference. His hand hovered over the button that would reissue the message. Everything told him to hammer down that button again and again until his communication was at least confirmed as received. The bugs were not as stupid or animalistic as standard citizenry were told. Not one bit. He knew that they could have disrupted communications. But if he did hammer away at the button, did send the message again and again, then he could be sending it into a room full of laughing firstborn. He could be seen as weak, desperate, unable to hold the line in the face of the enemy without panic. And that would translate to all of his primearch brethren. Neither option was worthy of him sending it again. But what if they had not received the one message at all? Would he doom his entire company out of hesitation and pride alone? His hand continued to hover for another whole minute. But then the decision was finally taken out of his hand. as a new chevron appeared on his screen. At first, he had thought it would be the precursor to a wave of them, but it was only one, no more. The drop pod slammed through the atmosphere and landed directly in front of the main thrust of the enemy, where the lieutenant had stated would be the most hazardous and vulnerable zone of the battle, the crux point. Other primearch in front of the line looked to the skies, scanning for more pods.
Oh, and by the way, who are you calling pretty boys? The Blood Angels are not pretty boys. They're badasses. And they do stuff. Hey, 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 hey. Hey! Easy. Easy. Why you gotta do, hey, hey, hey. Well, I mean, but Sanguinious was amazing. How you gonna, why you gotta say it like that? That's fair. That is fair. But I love Sanguinius. Hey, Sanguinius was amazing. So I guess I have two first names. Oh, I know a few people who have two first names, technically. And really, just about anybody could say that because, I mean, your middle name could be your first name and it wouldn't matter what it is. So, do you like, fuck, Rebecca Gittleman? If you don't particularly care for Sanguinius, do you like his son, Gilliman? Yeah. Ah, we're gonna have to hard disagree on that save on. No, that's treason. Treason, I tell you. Okay, I'm bored with this one.
Blood claws, grey hunters, or long
Okay, we'll
fangs.
try this one.
Yet others find it impossible to resist the lure of war power afforded by tactical dreadnought armor. To wear such a priceless relic of the chapter's grand history is an honor few space wolves will ever experience. So it is that a wolf lord will often be accompanied into battle by a brotherhood of hulking, nigh invulnerable champions, each ready to give his life for his lord, and eager to dispense his own particular brand of death. Each suit of Terminator armor is a
I
priceless
happen
relic
to
from the
love the
Imperium's
Emperor.
glorious
I
past,
love
able to shrug off
Sanguinius. I don't
anti-armor
know that I
weaponry and
care very
small arms
much for
fire
Rebut
alike with
Gilliman, but
contemptuous
I
ease.
like Sanguinius.
The Space Wolves maintain a number of these
Sanguinius
artifacts,
is the shit.
reserved only for the Wolf Lord and his guard. Each is bedecked with runes, totems, and trophies, marks of
Papa
honor
Blueberry
gained by its
Smurf.
wearer over long years of battle. Pelts and hides taken from Xenos monsters or Fenrisian beasts are often draped across the suit's broad shoulder plates. Presence of Wolfguard Terminators upon the battlefield can change the tide of war. They fight as the spearhead of the
Uh,
assault, enemy fire deflecting harmlessly from their relic armor as they stride forward to
orcs
tear
aren't
the throat
bad.
from the foe. Those foolish enough to step close are sliced to
I
bloody
tend
chunks by
more
plow claws
towards
or
Blood
obliterated
Angels
by a single swing of
and
a crackling
Space
fogger
Marines.
hammer. Any other targets are destroyed by the finest heavy weapons in the Great Company's arsenal.
Here's the thing. This is a highly unpopular opinion, but although I love Sanguinius and Rogel Dorn and General Mastina, I have to say that my favorite faction would have to be the Space Wolves. And I think it's probably because they're Nordic. But the Space Wolves and the Ravens Guard or Raven Guard are my two favorite factions. Don't really care for the Black Templars. They're religious and I don't like it. They were badasses, but I didn't really care for their super religious thing. Um, the Space Wolves I can respect. They were badasses. They fucked up some shit, but I like them. A lot of people hate them. um, I am not one of those people.
Enormous heavy flamers, assault cannons, and the dreaded Cyclone missile launcher. On rare occasions, when a sledgehammer blow is required to crush the life from a particularly resilient foe, a Wolf Lord will decide to deploy his entire Wolf Guard in Terminator armor. Such a force shakes the earth beneath its relentless advance, butchering all in its path with implacable ferocity. End quote. Only 2 hours later, the legates of Terra arrived in their impulsors. Great hovering transports that were able to float off the ground using anti-gravity technology. The first innovation in a very long time.
Yeah,
Millennia.
and
Tech heresy, many would say. As new as the millions
even
who they
though
carried. A newly forged chapter, straight after the Indomitus Crusade. Ultramarine stock, hardy and disciplined. By the book. But actually more adaptable than the
It
Sons
is
of
very
Rus would have usually
limited, Doom. It
accredited
is
such a
very,
chapter.
very limited.
It would seem that the regent
And
actually asked his sons to now look beyond the confines of the Codex.
I don't like how short Rogel Dorn's lore is, but the Space Wolves is relatively short. um, in the grand scheme of things, it's pretty short. Um, and I think General Mastina's lore is really, really short. Um, which kind of irritates me, but it is what it is. Um, the Space Wolves got a yeah, the Death Guard is pretty gruesome. Um, I like them though, but the Raven Guard is they're dark. Yeah, but there are mixed feelings on the Raven Guard, but essentially they're assassins. That's what they do. They slink in the shadows and they kill people. Um, so of course the lore is going to be a bit dark. um, it's not going to be a chipper story. And why they became that dark is even darker. So, have you heard the the Alpha Legion? The Alpha Legion is pretty fucking grim. They're like special forces, but like secret services kind of special forces. They're really weird. Um, I was listening to the Alpha lore earlier, and it was pretty fucked up. It was pretty trippy, but I may go into that. But I think the next one I'm gonna do is the Death Guard. I'm kind of just streaming because I was a little bit bored. Um, hang on. Since we're bringing them up, I may as well bring them up. Them's the rules. Them's the rules, yo.
The Chronicle of Virulence. For
You're
10,000
welcome,
years,
Doom, by the
the
way.
Death Guard have mercilessly harried the servants of the false Emperor. They have spread plague and sickness across the stars, wearing their enemies down with relentless determination. They have ruined countless worlds, corrupted and despoiled armies beyond number, fighting the long war in the names of Mortarion and Almighty Nurgle.
Fuck Nurgle.
Millennium 31. Into Damnation. The Destroyer. Trapped in the warp and ravaged by an incurable, unendurable sickness, Mortarion sells his legion's collective soul in exchange for deliverance from their seemingly endless suffering. Nurgle claims the Death Guard for his own, and the first Plague Marines stride into battle against the servants of the Emperor.
No.
emerging from the immaterium in time to join the invasion of Terra. So begins a war that will last for millennia. Rise of the Plague Planet. Alone amongst the traitor legions, Mortarian sons retreat from Terra in good order. They leave a path of desecration and atrocity across
No
the
hugs
Imperium,
for him.
before finally
Ew.
plunging into the horrific sanctuary of the Eye of Terror. For his victories
I
during the
will never
heresy,
gives
his
hugs.
unshakable faith, and for the singular achievement of holding his legion together in the face of the Imperium's vengeful ferocity. The Plague God gifts Mortarion with demonhood, and a
Um,
world to rule over as his own. So is a new Barbarous created near the fringes of the Eye of Terror, a more nightmarish hellscape than even Mortarion's home world once was. Millennium 32 to 41. Time of remission. Galactic respite.
I'd have to
The
think
Death
about that,
Guard
Isaac.
engage in a series of brutal wars
That's a
against
loaded
their
question.
erstwhile
I
allies in the Eye of Terror.
don't know that I have a
Though they
favorite
prevail
guard per
time and
se.
again, this territorial campaign consumes Mortarion's entire focus. Thousands of years will pass in real space, during which the Death Guard are rarely sighted by the servants of the Imperium. Bane of Change. During fighting against the Zinchian cultists of the Lost Spiral of Jacadis, Lord Glatox unleashes his feared drone hive. 7,000 fetid bloat drones thrum into battle, shrugging off the agile strikes of
I
disc
guess
riders and burning chariots as they close on their target.
I guess the Raven Guard would be considered a guard. So I guess yeah, the Ravens. Um, if I had to pick one off the top of my head, that would be it. Um, don't really know of one I like as much as I like them. So you're okay. So you're not talk. Okay, now I understand the question a little better. Um, it's really hard to say. Yeah. The Imperial Guard. I'm trying to remember if Valhallan was considered a guard regiment. The Imperial Guard, I like them a lot, but there's also the Valhallan. I mean, technically speaking, the Raven Guard is a guard. Technically speaking. Um, so when I think guard, I think Imperial Guard or Raven Guard would be who I would think of.
Target. Ploughing through ferocious enemy fire, the drones shield the lumbering dark mechanicum plague bombers at their heart, which rain rot diffusion
But if
warheads
I'm
on the
thinking
Zinchian
dark,
twist shrine and
dark
corrode it away
guards,
to
I guess
crystalline
the
ruins.
Death Guard is pretty fucking awesome.
The Green Death. The infected orc warbands invading the ecclesiarchy world of Sanctia evince a terrible new barbarism. They fall upon the planet's defenders and consume them bodily, devouring the living and the dead alike, as if compelled by demonic hunger. Bloating and swelling, the orcs become obese monstrosities that can move only at a snail's pace. Puzzled by this strange reprieve, the Adeptus Sororitas systematically...
I guess the reason I'm having difficulty with that one is I would have to then ask you what you consider a guard regiment. Because Raven Guard is an assassin. I mean, they are a guard. They are the Emperor's death angel, essentially. The Imperial Guard, of course, I mean, the name implies what they are. So, if you don't consider the Raven Guard a guard regiment, then what would you consider a guard regiment? You get what I'm saying?
purge the orcs with flame and bolter. It is then that Mortarion and the Death Guard of the Seventh Plague make planetfall. The demon primearch looms over the bodies of the orcs as he stalks to the front lines. At his passing, each greenskin bursts apart in a shower of foul fluids, and
Ew.
dozens of nurglings spill out
God
from
damn
their
it,
remains
Doom.
to follow their master. Sanctia falls to the green death within 20 hours of Mortarion's arrival, and the plague spreads across the
Doom's making us
ecclesiarchy held
listen
system.
to gross stuff. I forgot how gross this one is.
Victoriums of the Second Plague,
This one's
including
pretty
the rusty
fucking
claws
gross.
and the tainted lung, engaged the iron hands of Clan Cargul and Astra Militarum armored regiments on Zavia II.
I love
As the
Astra
grinding
Militarum.
tank war starts to turn against them, the Death Guard set light to the sprawling chem works of Zarya Secundus. Malignant plague casters channel the resulting flames into banks of corrosive smog that wreath the Death Guard tanks and dissolve the hulls of their Imperial foes.
Oh, goddamn
Able to
hiccups.
withstand the hideous conditions in a way that their enemies
I gotta go
cannot,
get a drink. I'll
the
be
Death
right back.
Guard soon crush Zarya too beneath their armored tracks. The Black Crusades.
The
Over
Black
long centuries,
Crusades.
Abaddon the Despoiler spends the blood of countless followers in battles against the Imperium. As though seemingly unconnected, each crusade is in truth part of a far grander plan that eventually triggers the opening of the Great Rift. During this period, the new War Master forges numerous pacts with the greatest Chaos powers, amongst them the Death Guard. Mortarian's scorn for Abaddon is obvious, but the demon Primearch cannot ignore his successes, and so sends warbands of his sons to aid in several of the Despoiler's campaigns. Typhus aids Abaddon more readily, fighting alongside him more than once, and using his attacks upon the Cadian Gate as an opportunity to spread the seeds of the zombie plague far and wide. The Battle of Cornavin. The Grey Knights meet the Death Guard on the planet of Cornavin, the battle representing the culmination of an ancient plan to banish Mortarion forever. The demon Primarch's might is too great, however. After Mortarion fells Supreme Grandmaster Geronitan in battle, the newly appointed Supreme Grandmaster Drago is forced to work a desperate banishment ritual that hurls Mortarion's spirit into the warp for many years. It is a Pyrrhic victory at best, a respite that Mortarion uses to gather fresh forces and plot his next and greatest invasion of real space. Seed of Doom. Confounded by the magnetropic defense matrices of the Forge World Takbandarha, an invasion force of the Fifth Plague Company is all but annihilated. Only a single Death Guard sorcerer makes it to the Forge World's surface, vanishing into the gloomy surf warrens of the Underfactorums. Summoning demons through ritual sacrifice and desecration, the sorcerer conjures a foul new army whose burgeoning corruption draws yet more of their number through the veil, their numbers growing exponentially. Though the initial Death Guard attack causes the merest pinprick in the hide of this Imperial world, the virulent doom that spreads from it soon sees Takbandahar sicken and die. Millennium 41. Time of Infection. The Siege of Vrax. Several Victoriums deploy into the grinding siege of the cardinal world of Vrax. Descending into the midst of the hideous trench war, the Death Guard unleash virulent bioweapons upon the Imperial forces and begin a chain of events that results in a full-blown demonic invasion. Hive of Horrors. Typhus infests Hive Pandorial with the zombie plague, departing before Imperial retribution can occur. Instead of encountering a hated and ancient enemy, the courageous men of the Necromundan Spiders find themselves plunging deep into the shadow horrors of a hive filled with the shambling corpses of those they came to avenge. Curdled Faith. Attacked by Tau pacification cadres, the Imperial Shrine world of Calendula remains defiant behind their shield of faith. Their defense falters, however, when the world's statues weep tears of filth, and their water sources turn to gelid slime. As battle rages and the body count spirals, hellish portals yawn in Calendula's depths, and the warriors of the Fourth Plague Company march out. Led by the Eater of Lives and bolstered by capering demons, they crush both the Imperial and Tau forces to claim the world for
Nurgle.
Sonorous entropy.
Nurgle.
Imperial Navy ships of Battlefleet Obscurus pursue an outnumbered plague fleet through the Cuidus Belt. After a savage battle, the last surviving plague ship manages to perform a full combat drop onto the world of Anverheim before breaking up in the planet's atmosphere. Emerging from their drop craft, the putrid choir tear their way into Anverheim's polar fortress city, Jotengard, and seize the complex for themselves. Expecting swift victory, wave after wave of Imperial forces descends upon the complex. Each is broken in turn upon the tenacious Death Guard's defences. A prolonged siege develops amidst bitter snowstorms tainted by Nurgle-esque plague spores. And as the fighting stretches into weeks, then months, the putrid choir's entropic dirge echoes endlessly across Jortengard from the fortress's vox emitters. At last, 3 years after the putrid choir first descended upon Anverheim, the remaining Imperial forces, starved, diseased, and deranged, flee for the stars, leaving the Death Guard warriors sorely depleted, but victorious within their contaminated fastness. Foul conquerors, hoarding bombs, delivering heavy armor to the forge world of Paradax, opens its ramp only to disgorge plague marines and bloat drones, led by elements of the Weeping
Doom's
Legion.
gonna kill me.
Bolters roaring, the heretic Astartes smear diseased gore onto the machines around them, spreading sanguous flux and corrupting the forge world's machine space.
Probably a bad idea to
Leading a
start shit with
glowing
them.
army of proto-demon engines and possessed servitors, the Weeping Legion begins the grinding horror known as the Paradaxian War. Plague of Shadows. A plague of flies erupts within the war-torn Sekmegara district of Komora. From amidst the flying clouds stride plague marines of the Mouldering Claw, who meet the Drukhari in savage battle before vanishing as mysteriously as they arrived. Several metaphysical plagues emerge in their wake. Stay of execution. On the killing fields of Vindor, the Death Guard decide to allow the last survivors of the Vindorian garrisons to flee, thus spreading Nurgle's gifts of plague and despair. Unwilling to watch perfectly good slaves escape, however, their Emperor's children allies pounce, only for the plague marines to bar their path. A furious battle erupts between the followers of Nurgle and Slaanesh, while the diseased Vindorians scatter to the four winds, taking Nurgle's dubious blessings with them. Millennium 41.
Yeah, fuck Nurgle and his blessings.
Galactic epidemic. The Great Rift thunders into being, reality bursting open like the stitches of a weeping wound to spill warp stuff into the galaxy. Plague fleets strike all across the Imperium, spilling from the roiling warp storms to spread misery and decay.
Oh, hell, sanguinious, goddammit.
As the blackness settles across great swathes of the Imperium, cult activity and recidivist uprisings lead to the demonic infestation of several prosperous star systems to the galactic north of Ultramar. Under the influence of Mortarion, these worlds fall entirely into...
I'm not even gonna make any bones about this. To be fair, I am a huge lover of Rogaldorn, Sanguinious, and General Mestina. So I am extremely biased when it comes to Nurgle and the corruption and bullshit. So of course I cannot cheer on Nurgle and his legion of infected insects. I guess you would call me an imperialist, maybe. I love the Emperor. Presence of joy. But I don't see very much joy in oozing, festering sores and gross abominations, which essentially is what they are. They're abominations. They're considered an abomination by the Empire. Um, so, I mean, my opinions on these are going to be slightly biased because of my love for Sanguinius and Rogel Dorn, if nothing else. Rogel Dorn to me is amazing. It's kind of like I can't be expected to really like Horus. Like, I hate Horus. I hate him. I understand that he is a confliction in and of itself because he didn't do what he did out of malice. He did what he did for to try and save things. But he thought he was doing the right thing. He thought he was doing what was necessary. But he was corrupted, and it took him over, I think. In my opinion, that is what happened. In my opinion, Horus was corrupted by the warp. And had that all not happened, I don't think Horus would have done what he did. Hello, J and E. And that looks like a doggo. But yeah, that's just my opinion. I mean, you can disagree with me, but to me, it's a matter of Horus was corrupted, and I don't believe, had he not been corrupted, I don't believe he would have done the things he did. I could be wrong. I don't know that I have too much of an opinion on it. I mean, it's war, and these things are gross, but it is what it is. Fucking claw. Ugh. Gross.
Nurgle's grasp and become the Scourge Star. A feculent fortress for the servants of the Plague Father within real space.
I know who you're talking about.
It is from these superated staging
but I can't remember his name
that
either.
Mortarion will launch his campaigns in Ultramar. Reign of Filth. During the siege of Godorian, a world unlucky enough to be within light years of the Scourge Stars, squadrons of plague burst crawlers lob their shells in high parabolas. The diseased munitions slam down on Manufactorum stack vents and spill their filth into Gordorian labor furnaces to create giant toxic plague sensors. The resultant smog clouds drive the Imperial defenders into the open, easy prey for the guns of the Death Guard. Outbreak Ultramar. Mortarion's long-awaited invasion of Ultramar begins.
This is going to be fun.
Cohorts of every plague company join the fight.
Oh, Jesus.
With the second, third, and
why do I do this to myself?
Deploying in almost their entirety. Marching alongside demon Talibans, corrupting renegade knights, traitor Titan legions, and countless warrior bands of renegades, cultists, and turncoat Astra Militarum, the grotesque armies of Nurgle forced the beleaguered defenders of Ultramar back step by bloody step. Unholy endurance. While Badsmack overruns a score of worlds to the galactic west of the Scourge Stars, forcing Mortarion to deploy numerous Victorums to counter its wrath. During the campaign's pivotal battle on Krug's world, Warlord Badsmack himself leads a headlong charge against the outnumbered Death Guard. Lord Fulgus, the Bloated, orders an immediate advance into the teeth of the Greenskin assault, calling down Plague Burst Crawler fire upon his own position. Weathering the pounding ordnance through a mixture of resilience and sorcery, the Death Guard draw the orcs into an explosive meat grinder.
Ew.
Plague Spitters dissolve wave after wave of the enemy hordes. Noxious Blightbringers told their toxins of misery again and again, driving the green-skinned weird boys insane and spreading despair through the ranks. Finally, Badsmack and his surviving boys flee in abject terror, only to be annihilated by the Plague Marines' pursuing fire. Gifts of Nurgle.
I don't want Nurgle's gifts.
Doggensul, several Victorians
Nurgle
of the
can
First
take his
Plague
gifts
Company meet
back.
stiff resistance from Imperial defenders. Death Guard dropships make repeated passes over the industrial fortress factories, dropping spiked iron cubes the size of hab units that crash down in the streets of manufactorums. Disease radiates from these ruinous monoliths, and the Imperial defenders waste no time in setting charges to destroy them. The true horror of the Death Guard plan is revealed when the charges blow, rupturing the cubes and allowing the tightly packed poxwalkers inside to spill from the wreckage. Within days, the walking poxes rush throughout the fortress factorums of Dragonsoul.
I think so,
Only then
Doom.
do the Plague Marines of the First Plague Company return to finish the fight. In the Maw of the Storm,
York.
as Warpstorm Formori engulfs the world of Danassar, Typhus duels and humbles Huron Blackheart atop the ruins of the Endless Spire. He leaves the tyrant of Badab alive as an abject lesson not just in Nurgle's might, but also in his generosity. Besieged. Much of the Third Plague Company find themselves besieged within the ruined husk of Hive
I would have to
Octural
probably
on
agree
Belissos.
with that one.
Led by Inquisitors of the Ordo Malleus, a huge force of Astra Militarum, Battle Sisters, and Imperial Knights hammered the Death Guard position day and night. Yet between the Death Guard's resilience and the screaming volleys of plague-burst mortar shells that are fired in return, it is the besiegers who find their forces ground down, and their warriors riddled with sickness. By the time the Death Guard launch their breakout assault, few of their attackers have the strength remaining to deny them. The Serpent and the Fly. Victorums of the 5th and 6th Plague Companies engage in a naval battle with Craftworld Saimhan and its fleet around the moons of Bosfordia. Before they are driven off, the Death Guard successfully board the Craftworld and spread their corruption through the territory of Wild Rider clan Siltach. In desperation, Saimhan's Seer Council orders ghost warriors to cut that part of the world ship away with weapon fire. So devastating is the despair felt in that moment that it conjures Nurgle demons into the waystones of the surviving Siltach clan members, possessing them and transforming them into aberrant, insectile half-breeds. Soon enough, tales of spite chaos-tainting Elder Corsairs are prevalent throughout the Paragos subsector and beyond. The Greyfax Gambit. Having noted the fanatical obsession the Death Guard hold for the number 7, Inquisitor Katerina Greyfax applies her suspicions to the battle for the shrine world of Dortweir. Launching their final assault on the 7th hour of the 7th day, the Death Guard pursue a baiting force of primearch White Scars straight into the firing lines of 7 Deathstrike missile launchers. The resultant rad conflagration obliterates the Death Guard presence upon Dortweir entirely. The Pristine Rotting. After enduring months of filth and indignity in battle against a putrid choir, the 14th Volpone Bluebloods can take no more, and beg Nurgle to spare them from the corruption. The plague god answers, rendering them forever gleaming and pristine, except for every seventh soldier amongst
So,
them.
would you be
These
interested in
unfortunates
doing
endure all the
Nurgle's
disease and
lore?
pestilence their comrades should have, floating into dirt-smeared,
It's
infectious
not that I'm a.
swarms,
Okay,
whose forlorn wails and wretched stenches
here's
drive the
my
rest of the
thoughts.
regiment mad with guilt and horror. The blue
I feel like if we're going to go down this road, um, go to the dark side, as it were, um, we need to understand what it is the Empire is fighting, um, to get a better understanding. Kind of to both sides of the thing, as it were. But I really don't like Nurgle. I really, really don't like him, but it's because I'm biased, and I admit that I am very biased. Um, we could do Nurgle, or we could do Horus, um, the ultimate shit starter. Um, Horus has some pretty decent lore. He's complicated though. He's not. Horus is a very complicated character. He was not necessarily a villain. He's kind of like Doctor Doom. Yeah, I guess it would be the best analogy. Horus would be similar, to Doctor Doom in his views on some things. No, there's not. There really isn't. They all do bad shit. Um, but Horus is villainized and hated, but he's complex. He's not just a bad guy. That you cannot sum Horus up that way. I don't know how to explain it, but you would have to understand Horus and where he came from and why and all the ins and outs to understand Horus. Horus is an insanely complicated individual. And so is Sanguinius. Sanguinius is not necessarily the greatest guy. If we're being honest, if we're going to be unbiased and just look at it across the board, Sanguinius has done some fuck shit. Like, he could have fixed a lot of shit that he didn't fix purely based on his ego, I believe. Could he have fixed it? Absolutely, he could have. Did he? He did not. Because I don't think that he was willing to admit that A, he made a mistake, and B, admit it to the point to where he has to openly fix it. So that would be my gripe with Sanguinius. That would be if I had a frustration with Sanguinius, that would be it. It would be that. he knew he fucked up. He could have fixed it, and he chose not to. In my humble opinion, um, I think he should have seen things coming long before they hit. With Horace, I believe that the fact that he didn't act on clear signs was purely hubris. Um, it's a very complex rabbit hole. It's not clear cut at all. Nothing about 40K is clear cut. Nothing. Nothing is absolute. Except for the fact that the Death Guard oozes stuff and it's gross. That's pretty absolute.
Bloods turned their guns on their former comrades before throwing in their lot with their death hunters. Millennium 41. Time of
Ew.
countries. During the war in the Rift, Mortarion decapitates the 7 champions of Libya, turning their skulls into virulent death's heads. These he uses to banish the great Commander back into the warp, sending him hence with a mocking gift of despoiled skulls, no longer fit for Quan's throne.
Yeah, I definitely don't want his
The
gifts.
Rust arise. Amidst the ruins of Chambak, knights of House Krast battle the mechanized infantry of the Pallid Hand. Shrugging off salvo after salvo of blight launcher rounds, the knights trample the Death Guard and claim victory. Yet in doing so, their steeds are infected with ferric blight. What emerges from that festering war zone is a warband of renegade knights rusted through in body and soul. Limbs shrieking and seized, thrones mechanicum tainted beyond recovery. Renaming themselves the Rust Hands.
So if you don't want to look into that Doom, what would you like to look into after this one?
A battered warship impossibly identified as the long-destroyed legendary Death Guard vessel Eisenstein is sighted beyond the third moon of Lorne's Landing, glowing with a lambent hue before vanishing without trace. Just days later, the Death Guard descend upon Lorne's Landing was Mortarion at its head. Inquisitorial savants note with alarm that this is the 6th such manifestation to herald the coming of the Death Lord himself. They fear what may transpire upon the 7th. The Gorgon's Lair. Alongside warbands of the Crews, the Purged, and several other renegade forces, Typhus leads the First Plague Company in a shocking raid against the Iron Hands chapter plant, Medusa. The clans drive off their attackers, but not before terrible damage is done, leaving regions of the plant as cursed quarantine zones. Deluge of Nebus. As the Death Guard siege of the Imperial hive world of Nebus reaches its 7th year,
I can't change your mind, Dr. Doom, because, like, I kind of agree with you on that.
known as Rotigus joins the fight,
I would have to disagree with you to change your mind,
of infernal fecundity.
because that is totally fair.
Protein vats in the hives overflow as
that is totally fair.
Grows at an unstoppable pace, burying entire levels under.
I don't think I have ever heard it put better, actually.
Vermin of every sort enter frenzied cycles of birth and death. The Imperial defenders
if he wasn't the one, he was definitely not helpful.
Of grizzle worms, a million-strong swarms of ravenous ripperjacks. Worst of all is the desert
Caliphus,
an endless storm of
Caiaphas, sorry,
water that seethes with infectious bacterial life. Soon enough, Nebus's plains become quagmires, then stinking oceans that rise higher and higher.
I haven't heard that one in a while.
Cities flood from the roots upward. Their last garrisons.
Or we could do the primearchs.
Salvation that does nothing.
Because I haven't covered all the primearchs yet.
Beyond endurance by the plentiful generosity of
it's like the forming of the primearchs all together was a pretty interesting one.
It is almost a mercy when the last Nebus defenders
If
meet
I'm
their
not
grisly
mistaken, that
deaths.
covers all the primarchs, both
A
good and
future
bad.
befouled. A sepsis cohort of the Seventh Plague Company strikes at the fortress monastery of the Minotaur's chapter. Their attack is driven off, but celebration turns to despair upon the discovery that Mortarian's sons have tainted the chapter's
That's
gene
one of
seed
my
source
favorites.
beyond
Is the
redemption.
Primarch lore. Is
So begins
I
a
love the
desperate quest
Primarch
for
lores.
survival, a crusade across the stars to reach Terra and access purified gene seed reserves before the chapter wastes away. The Yultar Breach. During the Battle of Yultar, Mortarion and his Death Shroud stand unaided in the breach against an entire Necron legion. Death Guard reinforcements fight their way frantically to their lord's side, fearing the worst. Instead, they find Mortarion and his last surviving Death Shroud, wounded but triumphant, and surrounded by sparkling, dematerializing heaps of foes. The Great Brewing. Deep within the Imperium Nihilus, the Poison Chalice invade the Medicae world of Pelucil. They seek to use the plant's macro-alembic complexes to brew the ultimate plague in Nurgle's name. Blighted Resurrection. The Pallid Hand are ambushed by overwhelming Necron forces from the Novok dynasty amidst the ruins of Hollowfall. During a fighting retreat, Mortarian's sons infect a number of Necron warriors with ferric blight. Phasing out, the android warriors bear the deadly contagion back to the stasis crypts of their tomb world, beginning an epidemic of catastrophic proportions. The
Oopsie.
Doom of Hesp. Victorians of the 4th and 7th engaged the Tyranids of High Fleet Lowtown amidst the steaming jungles of Hesp. When the swarms deploy toxicrenes and venomthropes to poison the environment, the Death Guard respond with plague spells, virus bombs, and demonic diseases. With neither side willing to back down, the atmosphere of Hesse becomes ever more toxic, until the jungles and even the warring armies are reduced to a gory, bubbling soup. The first Tyranid hive ship to taste this poisonous sorry recoils, its proboscis melting, and is bombarded into oblivion by the rest of its fleet. Hesp is left as an endless sea of toxic slime, too virulent for even the hive fleets to devour. Rising God. The Space Hulk Rising God is chosen by the Ferryman to join Mortarion's plague fleets. The Hulk is infested with warring gene stealers and orcs, and so squads of Bright Lord Terminators teleport to key points aboard, bearing ruin-encrusted plague bombs. Fighting their way through tides of foes, the Terminators prime their bombs before the survivors teleport back to safety. Thudding detonations shake the Rising God, disgorging Nurgle's rot, green lung pox, and squamous scourge amidst its warring passengers. 7 days later, the Death Guard return, wading through deep drifts of rotting corpses to claim the depopulated Space Hulk. Rust and Ruin. During the Firdas season on Thysacktis, a vast Death Guard force advances through the pyroclastic storm fronts in search of the Temple of Ascension. They are met amidst a crackling maelstrom by an enormous force of Iron Warriors, supported by corrupted god machines from the Legio Abharax. Continent-shattering battle ensues. Hordes of demons are summoned from the beyond to join the fight. Beneath the gaze of the Cycloniad statues, Mortarion and Perturabo themselves engage in a spectacular duel that lasts for several hours. It is a battle reminiscent of the incredible conflicts of the Horus Heresy, and Perturabo's sons cause terrible damage to the Death Guard forces. Yet the longer the fight rages, the more the contagions and metal-phage poxes of the Death Guard spread through the Iron Warriors' ranks. Ancient heretics sicken and collapse. Malevolent war engines seize with rust and shudder, sparking to a halt. Machine spirits go mad with revulsion and pain, and as the power of entropy and decay run rampant, the battle swings in Mortarion's favor. With his force in tatters and many of his precious war engines crippled beyond repair, even bitter Perturabo is finally forced to concede defeat. Falling back to pre-prepared defense lines, he detonates a series of explosive trenches amidst the raging storms and disengages in the ensuing mayhem. Badly mauled but triumphant, Mortalion and his Death Guard lay claim to the heathen temple they fought so hard for, and the ancient secrets that lay at its heart.
Alright.
Leading his favored victoriums of the Seventh Plague Company, Mortalion
This one
attacks
is at the
Rhinoxus,
end.
the oceanic chapter plant of the Golden Paladins. Timing his attack to coincide with an auspicious sevenfold eclipse, Mortalion has his the Primearch Project. I was born after the unification. I have only ever known the safety and security of the Imperium. I say this as I am told in that age, before the unification, during Old Night. It did not happen. We humans had witnessed such horrors that it barely registered amongst the darkness of those times. But then the Emperor came, and he cast the tyrants down, and he brought sanity back to Terra, the cradle of humanity. They say strong men make good times. I was a product of those good times. And you know what they say about good times.
They don't
I was
last.
soft. We all were. And when it happened, it was the worst moment in my life, whereas it should have been my greatest, my brightest memory. I froze. I was not alone. Many of us did. But I dishonored myself. I'm jumping ahead. I had worked so hard. Yes, I was aware that had I been born to another family, a less salubrious line, I would never have had this opportunity. But I was, and I did. And it did not take away from any of my achievement, for I had worked hard. As hard as any menial, harder even. I strove night and day, never failing, never shirking off, never dawdling or wasting time. I was aware how little I had. For when there are immortals in your midst, it makes things come into stark relief. My grandfather had been one of the last to surrender to the Emperor of Mankind. Though he hated to do so, it was clearly the right choice. And the Emperor has not aged a day since their meeting. Since the day he accepted my ancestors' acceptance of the inevitable. They were static points, these mortals. The rain fell, the sun shone, the world revolved around the sun, and the Emperor and his Primarchs existed. They were timeless, ineffable, infallible. They would shield humanity for all the days of our existence. They would lead us into a bright new future.
That's arguable.
Yet this fact, this one little thing, seemed to have changed us all somehow. We knew how precious life was, our allotted time in it, because we had something to compare ourselves against, the timelessness of the Emperor and his sons. Even his legions, his angels of death, they seemed to be timeless, never to succumb to the harsh truth of reality, of time. The weakening of the body, the slowing of the mind, the creep towards the date which would be our last day. They knew it not, even they, as Astartes. So it was not difficult to see why they were venerated so, were near worshipped. If we were not in an age of enlightenment, of logic, of progress, then surely we would have fallen on our knees and wept at their advent, any of them, his many forms of transhumans, his
Transhumans.
custodian guard, his marines, his primarchs, or himself. It was hard sometimes, I heard from others. Hard to know that no matter what you did, how hard you tried, how much we strived, none of us would ever even come close to their achievements. And we had only one lifetime. Only one. They had all of eternity to add to their legend. Imagine that. To be an Alexander or a Caesar, but to be able to pile achievement upon achievement, glory unto glory, for all eternity. Never ending, never stopping, never weakening or becoming frail. They had it all, is what some said. In hushed terms, whispered in dark corners of corridors, or when the Amasek flowed too freely. Jealousy, even here on Terra, it was rife. But I could not see it that way. I could not. Imagine being a servant of humanity, its guardian and protector, its general and brightest light, but to know that your trials would never end, that your role would be forever. Imagine that. I pitied them, in a way. Not in a negative or hollow, condescending way. Never that. But I wept for their trials, for the burden that would seemingly never be lifted from their shoulders. And from my perspective, it was impossible not to thank them, to be beholden to them. Human abilities were needed, as no mortal man could possibly take on this responsibility without end. They were asked to do this forever. I know the propaganda. When the galaxy is free of the taint of Xenos, when the stars have been brought to heel, when the enemies of humanity have been defeated, when the hatred of us has been revenged, when we were safe, then they could lay down their mantles, and only then. But I could not compromise this, for the galaxy is so large, its horrors so manifold, its dangers so multitudinous. I saw no end to their duty. And in this I mean no disrespect to their abilities, their ardor, their conviction. If anyone could dominate the galaxy, then surely it was the Emperor and his sons. But I had that sinking feeling that they would never be free, never be able to say, this has been done. We can rest now. For there are always more enemies, always more deviants and Xenos in the dark hidden regions of the galaxy. Always. And so I woke each morning with this feeling, my drive. I would assist them. I would aid them. I would extol their virtues. I would give credit where it was due. It was all I had to give. But I would give it. I would record their deeds. I would be one of the core who would witness their hardships, would show the rest of humanity what was being done in their name, what sacrifices were being made for their protection, for their safety. I would be a remembrancer. And my hard work paid off. For this was supposed to be my day. There were others, of course. A score of us had been chosen from the region. Some poets, some singers, artists, or dancers even. I was a historian, and a damn good one. For otherwise I would not be in those chosen. My exhaustive history of the unspeakable king and his neverborn was what took me over the finishing line, I believe. What made me stand out. I was told it was not the thoroughness or detail of my work. It was the analysis that had won me the place. My parents were so proud. We were of a lesser house, so to be chosen was a great feather in my father's cap. My brother, the eldest born, would also gain some lustre at court due to it. and they dreamed of receiving personal messages and updates from the very cutting edge of the crusade. That I would fill them in on juicy information they could use to further their standing at court. For all doted on the reports from the front, the glorious litany of victories that constantly rolled into the capital world and were disseminated so loudly. It was a time of constant jubilation, for despite the hardships and privations we all experienced, we knew it was for the right reason, for the right cause. We were winning. The glorious armies of humanity were led by the master of mankind and his transhuman sons. They simply could not be defeated. In fact, with the exception of the dark years of the Rangdang Xenocides, there seemed to be nothing in the galaxy that could resist our armies, our legions, our space marines. But in all of my study, in all of my tireless activity, in all of my secret pride at my cleverness, I had never once availed myself of the picked viewers. I treated it all like an academic task, a challenge. And despite how much time I devoted to their study, how much I thought I knew them, their trials, their secret travails, their hardships, I had never once seen one move. Not once. How could I know? How? But then, how could I not know? It had a name. It was a known condition, a realistic and logical reaction, identified, catalogued, and annotated. Yet I missed that as much as I missed the reality of my situation. I was a fool. The day came. I was so excited. I was fit to burst, as always. My family tried to relax me, to bring out a laugh. But not this day. The event should be somber before becoming a celebrant. It was a reward, but one hard-earned. And there was nothing funny or to be jested about. The honor of it all. Or so I thought that day. I was going to receive my papers, my mission, my status as a remembrancer from one of the sons of the Emperor himself. One would be there to hand my remit to me. I could not believe it. I knew I would meet one in my new role, but they were always out fighting, doing what they were born to do, leading the fleets and armies of the crusade. But one had come to Terra. Briefly, it is true, but one had returned, and they had been allotted to my ceremony. I would see one firsthand. I thought I was ready. I thought the biggest issue I would face would be not gabbling out a million questions, trying to wait until I was assigned to a fleet before being able to interrogate one of these beings of light. And I was prickly with my family, due to the nerves. But they knew me. So they ceased their prodding. They stopped the jibes. They just smiled to each other as we processed to our conveyance. And I felt like a lord of the Imperium when we flew through the airs. My new uniform pristine, my identification and invitation clutched to my chest so tightly. I took what I imagined would be one of my last looks at Terra, for I would soon be shipped off into the crusade. I had to burn the memory of this place onto my mind, so I could explain the differences between it and the many myriads of worlds I would see, so I could explain to the denizens of the court in words that they would understand. I knew I would see splendor and horror beyond the ken of any who remained on Terra. I was one of the elect. We alighted, and then slowly walked to the venue's core. A summer day, the light bright, the air as crisp as could be expected on Terra. It was the perfect day, the perfect venue. I joined the other candidates, the elect, as we stood before the stage, all looking up at the empty podium. Behind us sat in lines of chairs our families and friends. The highborn of Terra massed for a moment of glory. But that is when it happened. The moment I can never take back. The moment my life course changed, my projected life ended. For they were late. All knew. Their appointed moment had come and gone. But, strangely for an audience who were unaccustomed to waiting for anything, there was no background buzz of rising chatter. There was no hum of complaint and whispered to and fro betwixt families or those seated close by. We were awaiting a son of the Emperor, a primearch. No matter the delay, we all knew it was for the very best of reasons. He was busy, so we would wait. Then it happened. Perhaps due to the lateness. Perhaps because this one was not versed in their effect on normal mortals. But it happened. The curtain on the stage was drawn back, but as it did, they were already moving. Such economy of motion, such speed, such confidence. The beings that marched forward were huge, armored from head to toe in warplate. They towered over all, but with their elevated position, it only made matters worse. There were two Astartes on either side of him. Their armor shone in the morning light. Their footfalls created such an echo on the polished marble that it sounded around the entire area. And there he was in the center, a Goliath who dwarfed even the space marines at his flanks. He was massive, his bearing imperious, otherworldly, almost blank. And something inside me snapped. It was not just the size, the armor, the intent, the wave of aggression that hit us all like a tsunami, like a slap across the face. But this was only the initial shock. It was how they moved. Impossible. Their speed. It made blurs of their arms as they swung them up and down in the march. And they marched at us. It did something to most of us. I heard screaming. I heard chairs flipped over and people backing off in terror. But I did not see them. I could not even see the people around me. Not beside me, not behind me. Not even some of the urchins who had snuck into high places to try to snatch a glimpse of the living god we were about to meet. All I could see were the Marines and their master. It consumed me. I was stapled to the spot, unable to breathe in case it drew their attention. I could not screw up my eyes and stop the shattering of my mind, my future. I just stood there. And then it started. While the crowd backed away, I opened my mouth, my eyes wide, and a noise came out. A wail like an alarm erupting from my stomach, through my chest and out of my mouth. I just stood there wailing as my urine ran down my shaking legs. I had never seen one. Never. How could I know? I unmanned myself. The titanic being seemed confused for a moment, then nodded its head. He knew. He had been warned or cautioned, it seemed, but took no note of it when he had arrived. He had been one of the last found of all their number. In the days that came after, I made a million excuses for him, but it did not matter. The damage was done. He took immediate action. He stopped his walk to the podium and outstretched his hands as he then slowly moved forward now. His Marines stopped by a single hand gesture. He spoke slowly.
That was insanely
He spoke
kind,
calmly
by
as
the
he then
way.
approached the podium and stopped there. He began a known and quite lengthy greeting on the behalf of the Emperor. As we were all high-born, we knew the words, and his familiarity calmed everyone there. Then he went on, and his stentorian tones calmed all. No more screaming.
I know, right?
No more retreat. Embarrassed, most picked up their chairs again and tentatively
I
sat
love
back
Voldemort.
down, enraptured by his speech.
He's the best to me. I
He
like
did this
him.
so calmly, and he turned the event around. And he even stayed calm when I continued my wail. He merely looked down into my eyes, so gently, so knowingly, and closed them, then reopened them slowly. And he smiled the warmest smile I have ever seen. He smiled at me and nodded, then went on to look around the crowd
Mm,
again.
it's
And I
not gonna
calmed.
work. I'm about to fuck
I
this
closed my
picture up.
mouth, but I still could not move. I was transfixed. I was a statue. And when the names were called for the remembrances to attend, he did not even call mine out. We were in order, so he knew. He knew my name, and he omitted it. At its end, me standing there alone, he stepped down from the stage and slowly, oh so very slowly, walked toward me with his arms wide in greeting. But to all, it must have looked like a shepherd trying to calm a terrified grox. I could do nothing but stare as he encompassed my entire vision. He smiled at me again, but there was a tinge of sadness in his eyes and the curl of his lips. He looked down on me, and he spoke. To me alone. His voice was projected so strangely. How he did that I never will know. Be able to talk so softly, just to me, so personally, yet so that all there could hear. He told me that I should not be ashamed, that he had erred, and he apologized. To me, he apologized. He explained that it was a known phenomenon. It was called transhuman dread. He stated it was not my fault, but his. He should have been more careful. But he also stated that one who suffered from transhuman dread could not be a remembrancer. He did his best, so knows why. He was so unspeakably kind. He stated to all that I had been the one he most wished to meet, that he had read my treatise, and had requested me personally as a remembrancer for his fleet, that of all here, the elect, I was chosen. He then said he would send me reports. He would send me the deeds and details as none other, for I could then spend my days in that which I was most skilled to do, to tell the tales he related in a way that the people of the Imperium could understand, could experience. He said it was my most important duty, that it was not necessary for me to be amongst the crusade to contribute beyond any historian who had ever lived. He said I'd better serve the Imperium by remaining here and performing my mighty works. And each word crashed down on me like a mountain. Not because I'd wasted my life, not because I had failed at the very last hurdle, not because I'd just shamed my family and myself, and I knew, despite his pretty words, that I would never outlive this calumny. I was crushed by the weight of his words, because they slipped from a thing that should not, could not be. A living God spoke to me, and my mind collapsed under the weight of it.
He is this.
Transhuman dread, he called it. And all I can ever think in my most secret, most private moments, all I ever imagine when my mind rebels against the need for sleep, haunting my every day, my every hour, is this. How can anyone or anything stand against the power of our armies, our marines, our primearchs? They will do it. They will conquer the galaxy. And not just this one, but all galaxies, all worlds, all stars in the universe. For surely none, nothing, can stand against such sheer, unadulterated power. Welcome, gentle listener. I am Voldemort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the factions, forces, and faces of the Warhammer 40k universe. The grim darkness of the far future, where there is no time for peace. There is only time for war. And today, we shall be discussing one of the most important projects to have ever been attempted, one of the most audacious to ever be realized, one that must surely stand up against such titanic events as the creation of Golden Gates or the discovery of warp travel. It was a project that changed the face of the entire Milky Way galaxy. Of course, I can only be speaking of the Primearch project of the Emperor of Mankind, the protector of humanity. A good chunk of the entire setting revolves so heavily around those futuristic parodies of knights in shining armor, the Space Marines, that it is difficult to imagine the grim darkness without them. But it is in the Primearch project that their genesis is found. For not only the legendary 21 demigods of battle were created in the petri dishes of the savants under the Himalayan mountains, but through them, the Legiones Astartes, the Emperor's own angels of death, his space marines. But this was not done all at once. There was no straight path from conception to realization. For even the Emperor and his chosen aides had to make mistakes, could not create the finished product the first time out of the gate. So let us now delve into the nuances and history of the creation of the Primarchs. And let us ask the most poignant questions to begin our quest for enlightenment. And for this, we shall take the opposite tack to most historians. For them, the line is who, what, when, where, how, and finally, why. But we shall begin with this question, the why of the matter. What did the Emperor need with such weapons? Why did the Emperor create the Primarchs? So let us begin.
Excuse me.
For one can scarce believe the reason, most balk at the magnitude of the sheer scope. For the Emperor, the ultimate human, the protector of our entire race, he would do nothing less than threaten the very gates of heaven, or more to put it, the gates of hell, all for us. It is in his history and his experience that we find the need to drive, the very mandate to do as he did. For he was born to perform
Why
this
would
task.
you make them?
The Emperor of Mankind was a perpetual who was birthed at the very beginnings of civilization. Perpetuals are a rare form of human that age only up to a certain point. Then they are effectively trapped in time, or mostly. They do not age, they do not get ill, and they do not die, of natural causes at the least. But more than this, should any of them be attacked and slain, fall and their bodies broken, or be destroyed in any other way, bar only two, they will return. Their injuries will heal, their body parts regrow, their heart restarts, and their lungs snatch at air again. They were truly immortal, yet they were gifted in other ways as well. Most were psychers, those able to detect, touch, and manipulate the astral plane, the sea of souls, the materium, the warp. But as with all things, there were those who were more blatantly talented than others. And the most talented of them all was the Emperor. He was so potent that his consort, as close to an equal as he ever came, described his power as being more than all of the other perpetuals combined. That had they rallied, all of them, and stood against him, they still would have been outmatched. This is newer information in the lore, but it does not effectively change anything from my point of view at this present moment. For the Emperor to me is still the combination of the souls of the shaman of Earth. They gathered and knew that they were being stalked, that humanity had enemies in the ether, enemies of the future, whose hands stretched backwards in time to this point. And they slew themselves as one, so they could combine their souls' potence into the one receptacle, the one being. For they were all gifted as psychers and wise men and women, to be called shamans at all. The ultimate human to watch over all of the race, as otherwise their spirits would be taken one by one, and humanity would be defenseless to those dark forces in that war. Hence were the reincarnated souls of the entire shaman class made into the Emperor. Now I square this circle by stating that the souls of most went to the Emperor, and perhaps the later perpetuals were merely fragments of this ritual that did not quite make it to the whole. And, of course, that one perpetual who came first was just a precursor, a couple of souls merged together who couldn't quite wait. Hence for me, the perpetuals should always have been drawn to one another, as they were always intended to be one, the Emperor. But in any case, the perpetuals all met and worked with the Emperor at one point or another, for he was a leader through and through. He commanded respect by action. He drove many forward by his will and example alone. Now this could intimidate and anger those around him, for as they would all attest, they could not keep up. But they also did not agree with him on so many things. Perhaps it was his enhanced ability, intellect, wisdom, connection to the warp. It is impossible to say. Or perhaps it was the drive from his genesis, his reason to live being to protect his race, and his inherent knowledge that time was always against him, against his plans. But he was utterly without doubt, as any man of conviction is, if they know there is no option but to win, no choice whatsoever. And this came across as arrogance. So there were strains with many, and wars with some of his perpetual brothers and sisters, his fellow immortals throughout time, facing one another either as friends and colleagues, or as adversaries and bitter enemies. But he always won out. Always. And he has been alive throughout all of human history. Regularly, if not frequently, he has attempted to step in to guide humanity onto his golden path. He has been many figures in history who have been teachers and prophets. He has attempted to stay mostly in the background, but his fingerprints and those of the other perpetuals are littered throughout human history. And they all know what he aims at, the swift evolution of humanity. For he knows it must be done before we are consumed utterly. In this reality, the grim darkness of the Warhammer setting, the dark gods thirst for the souls of humanity, and 3 of the 4 are connected to us far more than any other beings in the universe. Though the Eldar make a superbly sweet treat, it is humanity that they wish to make their thralls. It is us, the last creations of Ka, the last of the old ones. The Emperor stepped back for many millennia when the race was headed exponentially upward, when we were reaching our peak, the golden age of technology. But when the birth pangs of Sinesh destroyed the human hegemony by stopping all warp travel, he was forced to move. In the background, he had always been researching, always been trying to find the keys to what was needed, the very technologies that the old ones used to create us, and so many other races across the galaxy. The power of genetics, the harnessing of directed evolution. It was almost poetic. Why? Due to his programming? Or perhaps due to his experience? For the Emperor had not just been a Confucius or a Solomon, but also a St. George. He had struck down the Void Dragon when it rampaged on Earth in the dark days of early medieval savagery. The Emperor knew the power of the Dark Gods. He felt their birth, each and every one of them. He knew their genesis. What had not given the most power, perhaps, but had given them the most form? It was humanity, his own race. Imagine living in a world where magic and summonings and demons were also very real. Then imagine you witnessed every age of humanity, all that had been done in the name of these terrors, and that you knew their eyes were set on Earth. The genocides, the wars, the torture, corruption, and pestilence unleashed on humanity, most times using humanity to perform it. This was the work of the enemy the dark gods of chaos. That is why he was so adamant, so rushed, so directed, so indefatigable. He was the only one who could fathom the menace,
Hello.
the danger. The reactions of Erda to her part in the matter clearly show she had not even an iota of realization of the power and threat of the enemy. Not one iota. Not really. And it was made all too clear to the Perpetuals what was at stake when old night settled in, or it should have been, when the horrors of the Age of Strife unfolded before their very eyes. But I will be brief on this element, as we must cover the Age of Strife and Unification Wars in more detail at another point. Let it just be known that of all the wars that have ever been fought in all of the history of the galaxy, there are three that stand out the most. The War in Heaven, the Horus Heresy, and the Unification Wars. Personally, I believe that Unification Wars were far worse than the Heresy, yet only for the numbers involved is Horus's rebellion always touted as the most cataclysmic. From my reading of the lore, the half-hidden truths, the scant and oblique references, the Unification Wars were literally hell on Earth. And it was this hell that bred the need for such radical action, such an impossible task. The dark gods were rife on Earth, which was then called Terra. Psychers and witch cults of immense power. Demon princes and their entourages strode the very surface of Terra. The remains of the most vicious weapons of the previous age were now under the control of mad tech barbarian tyrants. All the technology of the Age of Wonders in the hands of psychopathic barbarians. And gene-tech enhanced monsters were as prevalent in the armies of those despots as were the unclean of the warp. It was hell. And somehow, he and his allies had to take it. All of it. Before they could do aught else. They had to reclaim Terra for humanity. It was in this backdrop that the plans were made. For the Emperor would not move until the death of the unspeakable king, the one man he ever feared. But to take Terra from such enemies, from such horrors, it required he made horrors of his own. As stated, the Emperor was trying to create more advanced, more evolved humans. So he was a master geneticist and surrounded himself with more of them at every opportunity. And thus he took his long-term plans and he condensed them. He made his custodian guard. Custodies were the most developed humans possible with his craft. They were huge, larger even than the later Astartes. Yet their manufacture was too time and resource heavy. They were his guard, but they could not be his army. They simply cost too much. So he created his Thunder Warriors, and the template some say they came from, the Angel, the forerunner of the Primarchs. He had to use his own DNA, that of a Perpetual, to create all of it. But he could not do it alone, and had to use the genes of his consort, Erda, the one who had stuck with him throughout the ages, so in a very real way, the Primarchs and the Astartes were as much the children of Erda as they were his. The Thunder Warriors were also huge, larger than a Marine, but not as large as a Custodian, some reports state. But they were things made for a tragic and terrible war. The most brutal war of them all, the Unification Wars. They were recruited from the most animalistic and terrifying of all the populations that the Emperor brought into his Imperium. He, Malcador, and Erda were the prime movers, but they had no choice, is what he would always tell them. And he may have been right. But the use of the perpetual DNA allowed their creations to be so much more than human, so much more than the gene warriors of other warlords, because their very beings were resistant to the warp and all of its spawn. Not proof from, but more resistant than any. And this was necessary due to the number and power of the hellspawn on Terra. It is truly a wonder that the Imperial truth was taken up at all, with demons and horrors of the warp having been in the very center of the wars. But then, the war did not take years. It did not take decades. It took centuries. And it took decades after the last flag had fallen before they strode out into the universe with their imperial truth as a core tenet of the crusade. Well, that and revenge. The Thunder Warriors, the Legiones Contagious, they were wild and dangerous themselves, but they were loyal to him alone, their emperor. Their power was only matched by the instability of their design, for they would have heart attacks, twist inside out under their skin, totally break down at any moment, especially during combat. But this was the price of speed, the corners the Emperor may have cut. Or perhaps he built in this fragility, this failing, on purpose. But in any case, they did not last. They had nothing of the longevity of the Custodes and the later Astartes, and that grated on them at the time. The angel was a being of such grandeur, it can only have been the precursor of Sanguinious. But it was so much more. Its light drove away chaotic influence and beings before it, and its ability to slaughter was unmatched. It destroyed demons and psychers alike and flew on its golden wings surrounded by a corona of power, directly into the midst of any army it was set against, and it destroyed them all. Alas, like the Thunder Warriors, this angel who outshone even the primearchs was flawed. At the height of its youth, it went mad. It flew to a city on another planet and destroyed every living thing there. All humans. It stated they were not worthy of the love of the Emperor. It then went out in concentric circles, slaughtering every city it crossed. And it did all of this in a day. And the Emperor was forced to inter it in a very special trap, in a very special place. He did not destroy it, but it was of no further use to him. Thus the Unification War progressed as the Thunder Warriors and Custodian Guard, led by the Emperor Malcador, took empire after empire, and their resources grew. While his armies did this, the research, the great work continued, and the Primarch project was begun. But this was not just an act of science and genecraft. No. For the Emperor knew that his greatest enemy would ever be chaos. Their minions would be at war with his for all eternity if he did not forge weapons strong enough to end the deadlock and defeat them once and for all. This was always his goal, to defeat chaos. So his sons should be things that would be able to fight the worst the dark gods could throw at them. And so the Emperor used all of his mystic might in their creation, a might that some say was not his own, was borrowed from the enemy themselves on Moloch. But we should get to that at another time. The Emperor used warp power to enhance the Primarchs. It is not entirely known at this point, and it may never be known. But many believe that the Primarchs had powerful entities grafted to their all-too-human souls. Others believe that he bequeathed some small fraction of his own power to his sons, to his Primarchs. No matter the source, the Primarchs are not just super soldiers. They are beings of light in equal measure. They truly are as akin to him as is possible to any who was not born a perpetual. Each Primarch was huge, powerful, and intelligent to a level that was almost impossible. They each had specialities, their strengths, their purposes, but all were made for one thing, really: war. They would be the leaders of his armies, his legiones Astartes. Each Primarch was also the genetic template for their legion, each marine a tiny copy of their splendor. They were not as individually strong or as fast as Thunder Warriors, his marines, but they were stable, both of body, mind, and spirit, and they were effectively immortal. They died, but not of age or sickness, and they were sponges for information, unquestioning in their duty and loyalty, and utterly without fear. They would need to be. For they would face all of the xenos, the alien races of the galaxy, and they would be tasked with bringing them all low. To free all of humanity across the entire galaxy, not just the old colonies of the human hegemony of old. No. The Emperor had seen too much, had endured too much even then. Although there was not the rampant, myopic, rabid xenophobia of the age of the Imperium, the Crusade was not gentle to those they met. They had been raised on the tales of the traitorous attacks on humanity during Old Night. Even previous allies had turned on us, and they were not gentle at all. And they would defeat all they met, but it was most often due to the abilities of the Marines, not only possibly due to the brilliance of their leaders, of the primearchs. Each was a general of astonishing ability, and they used their sons, their legions, like fine crafted scalpels. Perhaps the Crusade would have been successful without their inspired leadership. Perhaps. But if they had not existed, had not helped, had not led, then the Crusade would have taken millennia, if not more. They, as much as the Astartes, and the billions of support armies, fleets, and technical support staff that they took with them, they dominated the galaxy. Almost. But it was not as it should have been. For the Emperor was betrayed. He had designed his sons, had gifted them his genes and those of Erda. He had clothed them in dark power, and he had made them homes. Under the Himalayas, the Emperor's palace, deeper even than his labs, there was a lake, and around that artificial lake were villas. 20 villas for his 20 sons, but the last were twins, Alpheris and Omegon, so 21 of them were made. Yet they did not enjoy one moment of these villas, for they were not raised on terror under the watchful guiding eye of the Emperor Malkador, because the Emperor was betrayed. Erda, his consort. She took truck with the path that her husband had laid out for them. She did not wish the Primarchs to be weapons of war, despite being complicit in every step of the project. She told herself that she was saving them from their father, that his dreams would use them all up. She told herself that she was setting them free when she worked with agents of the dark gods to spread them throughout the universe. She knew of the enemy. She had witnessed the power of the dark gods, was near as old as the Emperor himself, so she would have known of their birth through him, if not from herself. She would have walked through all of time, seeing crusades and wars and plagues and horrors all performed in their names. Yet she took her own sons and threw them into the warp, into the very clutches of the dark gods. They were scattered across the galaxy. So in one manner, she was right. But the results of her actions, the influences that changed them, not being raised as brothers, not being raised by the Emperor Malkador and Erda, as had been planned. It was the footstep of doom to the entire human race, and everything that has happened since, all of the pain, misery, and slaughter that came later, every last inch of it is on her. It is Erda's fault. She was too weak and listened to the blandishments of chaos. She betrayed the one man she knew was fighting them, the one man who could possibly win against them, her companion of tens of thousands of years, the Emperor. But it was her children, the Primarchs, who paid the price, the terrible, terrible cost of her meddling. He had no choice. Usually, a reunification was a thing of joy, a moment of triumph. The son of the Emperor had been found. The whole of humanity was enriched by the news. Celebrations would be declared that will last for weeks. All across the stars, all of mankind would come together, for a lost Primarch had been found. but not that day.
Okie dokie, folkies. I am tired. I am finished with the picture though. Um, that's what we have. We will continue the primearch lore. It's probably gonna take at least 3 episodes. Um, because the primearch lore is very long, and it's it's a lot, and I can't cover all of it in one stream. Um, I mean I could, but we would be here for 2 or 3 days. Um, and I can't do that. So we will continue on the primarchs, and I think what we will do, which will give me a sense of direction from here, I think what we're going to do is we're going to finish up the primarch lore, where they came from, so on and so forth, and then we're going to follow each one of those primarchs and show where they all went, who they are, what they did, um, because each of them started a faction. So, um, I think it would be helpful, insightful, and so what after we finish this, we will move on to. We've already done Roll Dorn, and we've done a lot on Sanguinius. Um, but he'll come up periodically throughout the Primarch lore, so I don't really need to cover him independently necessarily. Um, I think we will start out with the Space Wolves Primarch and move on from there after we finish the Primarch lore. Unless we decide to go with a different Primarch. But anyway, we do know that we're going to continue with the Primarchs and then go from there. I hope you guys have an amazing night. I hope you have enjoyed this rabbit hole. It was random at the very beginning, but here we are now. And I will see you guys soon. Bye.